Hello and welcome to this online module for the CDC University course in Research Instrument Design. My name is Karen Hilliard and I will be your instructor for the in-person course. I know in the real world that instruments for research are often slapped together at the last minute with very little planning. But there are a lot of good reasons to carefully craft a research instrument and to put adequate time and resources in to planning, designing, and deploying it. First of all, it's going to help you get the most you can out of your data gathering. Because if you're going to expend resources at all, you might as well be sure that you get exactly the data that you need. Secondly, it can really help you avoid costly or embarrassing errors where something gets left out or something's asked in the wrong way, or perhaps someone is offended or has a bad experience as a participant. You want to avoid those things from the get-go. Designing a good instrument can also make the research process more pleasant and rewarding for participants. That means that you're going to get better data, but it also creates a positive relationship between the scientific and public health community and the public so that people will participate in research in the future. And that's a very worthy and important goal in and of itself. What you will also learn in the course when we meet is that all of these things need to be considered at the very beginning so that you lay the foundation for a great research instrument before you even write a single question. I've been designing quantitative and qualitative research instruments for federally funded research for a number of years now. And prior to that, I did it in the market research field in public relations and advertising. And I have to say, although I'm at the point where I can craft a pretty good instrument these days, I've gotten there by making a few mistakes along the way. And part of what I hope to convey to you when we meet are all of those lessons that I've learned so that you can skip the school of hard knocks and get right on to creating instruments that work well for whatever data you're trying to gather. Some of the things that we'll be talking about will be my list of 8 research instrument design gotchas and how to avoid them. These are 8 lessons that I've learned the hard way that I hope that you will be able to learn from the start and avoid mistakes that you can in the process of designing your instruments. Let's go over them now one by one, and I'll give you an example of some of the mistakes you'll know how to avoid after we meet in class. One of the first is failing to ask the right questions. So often, researchers don't really get to the bottom of why people are behaving in a particular way, how they arrived at the attitudes that they have, because they simply don't ask the right thing. Yes, they're doing surveys, yes, they're doing focus groups, but they're not really doing good listening. And so one of the things that I hope that you'll know how to do even better after we meet in our class is how to avoid going in with your own assumptions, how to be sure that you don't skip the formative research along the way and that you do that formative research with the target audience in order to know from the start the right kinds of questions to ask to get the information that may be out there but that people aren't necessarily going to know that you need to know. Number 2, failing to use the right words for your particular audience. I remember an instrument that I worked on, and fortunately a problem came to the forefront in the stage of formative research, and that was that we had carefully prepared a Spanish language version and an English language version of an instrument, but we started doing some testing of that instrument with people. And we were giving our Spanish-speaking participants the option to choose between an English language or a Spanish language instrument. What we found, however, was that even among native Spanish speakers who chose themselves to take the English language instrument, there were some gaps in language, some words in English that they simply did not have the same understanding of as our native English speakers who were participating in the formative research. So although we thought we were being very careful, we would not have caught that error unless we had actually talked to people, which we did, to find out that people for whom English was not the native language were still having some trouble when choosing to take an English language survey because they didn't have perhaps full command of the language. So in other words, remember that the same words can mean different things to different people. Another gotcha that you'll learn to avoid is using answer categories that let participants take the easy way out. We all know that there are people out there who are kind of sitting on the fence when it comes to some issues, people who may be undecided. There are also people who don't want to think too hard sometimes about what their opinion really is or what they really think the facts are. And that may be fine if that's what you want to get a sense of, but sometimes you really need to push people to decide one way or the other. So for example, you may need to force a choice instead of providing a not sure or neutral category, where in other cases, not sure or neutral may be appropriate as choices to offer someone. So learning the difference between when to force an answer and when to allow people to equivocate a little bit is an important skill and one that we'll go over. Another gotcha: asking questions the wrong way for the research method that you've chosen. There's no way to hear crickets, you know what I mean. Everything's quiet, all you can hear are the crickets chirping. Then to ask a closed-ended question or a yes or no question in a setting like a focus group or an interview. Sometimes you get near silence when you ask for something that provides very little opportunity to elaborate. So thinking about the method that you've chosen and the kinds of questions that go best with that methodology is an important skill and one we'll talk about. Another gotcha: ordering your items in ways that can bias the response. You may need to have a map of where you're going in the survey and know that you're leading toward a particular kind of question. But we don't always need to tip our hand to the research participant. Sometimes, in fact, you may need to ask a question that is more general and then gets more and more specific as you go on. Because sometimes if you start with something more specific, you can give them an idea of what it is you're trying to get at in your questioning, and it may lead them to answer in ways that they think you want to hear. So, in other words, you should know where you're going with the questions, but don't necessarily tip off your participant too early. So, building a strategy for how you reveal different issues and different ideas in your questions is an important part of research design. Next, leaving out a key construct or using an answer type that's going to preclude later statistical analysis. In other words, not thinking through what it is that you really want to end up with and leaving some key single item question out that messes up your ability to analyze the results. So for this, advanced planning is critical. You don't want to, for example, get to a point where you decide that you want want to analyze your results according to the health belief model, but you haven't included a question about a key component of that model, the construct of self-efficacy. So you want to think through what your analysis plan is before you write your questions, as you write your questions, after you've written your questions, and make sure that you don't leave anything out. There are also some more nuances in terms of what choices you give in terms of answers. For example, whether they're categorical or ordinal or continuous variables. That may sound confusing now, but it's something that we will talk about, so you'll have a better idea of how to work with a statistician to prepare your questions ahead of gathering the data. One more gotcha. Fatiguing or frustrating participants with bad answer categories. People get very frustrated if you ask them a question that doesn't have an answer in the selection of answers that are provided, for example, in a multiple choice survey. So you want to be sure that you have provided an exhaustive set of answers, that you haven't asked questions that are really asking two things, but only provided answers that they can choose from for one of those questions. That's called a double-barreled question. We'll talk about what those are and how to avoid them when we meet. But the key here is to get real people to take your survey and tell you where the problems are ahead of deploying that survey. And finally, one last gotcha, ordering or asking questions in ways that make people clam up. There's a certain subtlety to getting people to reveal personal information, health information, and to get them to do so feeling comfortable, feeling at ease, feeling like they can be candid with you. If you approach it in the wrong way, you can shut people down before they even get a chance to start revealing those important facts to you. It's even more true if it is a sensitive topic or a very private topic that people may not be accustomed to talking to strangers about. This is true whether or not you are asking somebody to do an interview or a focus group where there's an interviewer or facilitator there in person with them, or whether they're doing a survey. Asking questions in the wrong order can shut down the flow of information. So you want to be mindful of how your questions unfold and how to make participants feel more comfortable and more forthcoming. Those are just a few of the things that we'll go over when we meet, but I'd like you to also begin thinking of problems that you may have had in instrument design in the past. Have you had your own mishaps with research instruments that have gone bad? Have you had problems with the data once you got through with the survey or through with the focus groups and found that you left something out? Bring those problems to class. We will troubleshoot them by applying best practices for effective research instrument design and by learning from your mistakes, just as I've learned from mine. And collectively, we'll leave with the tools to build even better research instruments and gather stronger data, more accurate data for the kinds of issues that all of us are working on in public health. Thank you so much for joining me for this online module, and I will see you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.